through my Ask I to live stream.
Okay.
And
Okay.
a sad thing, no voice as well. So
I actually think what happened there, guys, is my streaming software didn't automatically activate the stream to go live. So we've been talking to
there you go. Now it's
ourselves
working. Yeah.
all this time. So sorry about that. This is different new streaming software for me. It usually goes live straight away. So hello
Wait a minute,
again.
exactly. Wait a minute. We might exactly. There we
Let's
go.
try that again.
Okay.
We were talking to ourselves. The streaming software hadn't connected to YouTube. So welcome to the April-May live stream. This month we've got quite a lot of bits to talk about, mostly sort of RailClone. That's mainly where our questions have been this month, but a few new things in ForestPack as well. It's hard to think about what I said a minute ago. So the main thing I wanted to talk about at the beginning of this live stream today is just to go over some of the new RailClone systems that we've released in the last few months since we last did a live stream. And you may have seen some of these on our social media and Reels and so forth, but clearly not everyone sees them because we've had some questions recently about how to achieve certain effects that you can definitely do with these new presets. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time starting off going over a couple of those floor styles. But I also encourage you to ask as many questions as you want in the chat if you're watching this live. And if you're watching on catch up, feel free to ask any questions in the comments and we'll get back to you there as well. And also ask questions that you might want to have considered for the next live stream, which will hopefully be more regular than we've had in the past. Jaime, I don't know if you've got anything to add before I move swiftly on.
Nothing else. I just was putting in the chat that we forgot about kicking off the live stream, so we were basically talking to each other. So now, welcome everyone.
Yeah,
happy to have you here. This time we forgot as well to share this on the socials, so it's only 7 guys, but no worries. Everyone's gonna see it on.
It just shows we're real, right? We're real guys, like
exactly
starting live streams in real time. Okay, so let me flick to the 3ds Max, and now it should be working. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to very quickly talk about the new flooring system. So we've released these on Reels, and we did have flooring systems in RailClone before. So when you saw them, you might have thought, why are they showing us these old RailClone styles? But actually, these are new RailClone systems that have been rebuilt from the ground up. And the difference really is they've got tons more control, so you can really customize them to suit your scenes. And I'm going to just quickly show you how a few of these work. So the question that we had recently, which reminded me that people still weren't aware of our new flooring styles, was how to create a kind of a normal parquet strip floor, but where the divisions in the floors were offset by a third on each plank. And that's closest to this parquet strip style that you can see here. Now, the nice thing about these styles, these new RailClone systems, is they're totally customizable. So although this one won't be quite right, we can easily edit it. So let's just load it up and have a look. Just takes a second to load. Okay, so now that's loaded up, we obviously want to tell it where we want the floor to be, and we do that using a closed spline. It can be any shape, including curved shapes. So we'll just pop that in there, and we can see a very simple parquet strip floor. Now this is what I mean. So at the moment, this parquet strip floor, you can see it is divided here into halves. It's overlapping by half a plank each time. But there's loads and loads of controls. If I just come down to the right hand side here, it lets you customize this. So first of all, you've got things like materials. So we can easily change the materials, but of course you can also use your own, because most people might have very specific requirements from their architects. Which one was I on to start with? Let's go with chestnut, maybe. No, ash. And then we can control the size of the plank. So even that wasn't possible with the old systems, but now we can change the size of the planks here too. Length and width. But the main thing that this customer wanted to do was to offset it in thirds. So let me just set this back, because I've just randomized it, so we don't want to do that. There we go. So this option here, which says offset over n rows, is exactly what will do that. So you can see at the moment it's set to 2. If I set it to 3, then that's exactly what they wanted. You can now see it's splitting into thirds, those boards. If I wanted to do 4, I can do that. 5, I can do that. So this would be how you'd achieve that with this style. Or you can have them linear like so. So it's a very easy place to start. The other things you can do here is rotate the array, so you can have it at any angle. So we could have this running at 45 degrees, if I actually clicked on the right parameter. 45 degrees, for example, or 90 degrees, or 180. So we can rotate at any point. You can offset it on the Z-axis in case the spline isn't quite where you want it on the floor. And we can also, and this option wasn't available before, we can cap the sliced ends of the boards to fill them in. So if the edges of the boards are seen, you can now cap them. And when we originally created the flooring styles, the first flooring styles, RailClone couldn't do that. So the other thing we can do, as you saw there, is randomize the size of these planks. So if you wanted a more conventional floor where the lengths aren't so regular as this, then we can start to randomize that like so, and then you're getting something that's a little bit more like you would expect a sort of more natural floor to look rather than a parquet. And the other thing you can do, which is less common but it's pretty cool, is you can randomize the width. Now obviously you can't randomize the width of every plank because you're just going to end up with little gaps, but you can randomize the width per row. So if I exaggerate this a little bit, maybe by bringing this smaller, you can see that the plank sizes are starting to randomize for each row now, which gives you a really interesting effect, which again was absolutely not possible in the old styles. So there's loads of control here. If you want to break up the regularity a little bit, you've got some thickness randomization there, so I can really exaggerate that. I mean, obviously no one's going to put a floor in like that, or if they do, they should be sacked. But here we can see that we can add a little bit of irregularity, like so. Okay. So that's one of the styles, but as I said, there's loads of them. This is your simple plank style, and some of the others give you interesting other options. So the herringbone double, for example, let's take a look at that. The old herringbone style wasn't at all adjustable because the way we had to configure the herringbone pattern was to do it kind of manually using offsets of real values built into the graph, which meant that it wasn't really procedural in the sense that we couldn't change the plank size. But the new ones are completely procedural. So we've got a lot of the similar controls, for example, but we've also got a width control, so we can change the width of the herringbones. Like you can see here, you've got a length, so you can control length of them, and then you get some interesting effects. Thickness and thickness randomization. You can also add padding, which definitely couldn't do in the old one, so we can add gaps between the herringbone styles, and you can randomly tilt them as well, so we can kind of randomly create a little bit of unevenness. I would keep that value very, very low, like so. So that's kind of handy. And the other option you've got down here, and you can see this is enabled at the moment, this is a double herringbone pattern, but if I turn that off, I get a conventional single herringbone pattern there, which is pretty nifty. Another one that I think includes more interesting controls than we ever had on the original is the parquet chevron, or the parquet fern chevron. Let's try that one actually, maybe. I think I included it in that too. And this particular floor creates this kind of arrow-shaped pattern that you can see in the preview thumbnail, like so. And once again, you've got controls for the size, the length of the diagonal parts and the width, so we can control those. But interestingly, for this chevron pattern, you've also got the ability to change the angle of that. So you can see it's 45 degrees at the moment, but I can actually start to straighten it out, which is kind of interesting. So this one's got some really nice controls in it to help you create some completely different styles if that's what you wanted. Let's have a look at a couple more. So the chevron and the park chevron are similar. Continuous weave is this kind of overlapping one. Let's have a look at this. If you've got any questions about these, then please let me know. Or if there's anything that's in them that you wouldn't like to see, especially if there's a pattern that would be useful for your work, let us know.
There's only one question, Paul.
Yeah.
Well, it's just comments that say that it would be nice if it also makes the upper board automatically. That referring to the previous example.
Okay, I assume so. This is Baseboard that's editable. I assume by the upper board, what they might mean is the skirting, the baseboard.
I was thinking about the same.
I would
to mention that. Obviously, we have
so
for that as well.
It's not automatic because I think the difficulty with adding it automatically is that the spline that defines the floor might go over doorways and openings and stuff like that. And if we automatically use the same spline, then your skirting board, your baseboard, would also cross doorways and openings, and if there are any floor to ceiling windows and that kind of thing. So then you'd have to start controlling it with material IDs and stuff like that, which is totally possible. But it does bring me to my next point, actually, which is that in RailClone recently, we did also include skirting systems. So even though it's not built into exactly the same style, we can, in fact, load a skirting system or baseboards, I think they're called on here. I've gone for the American one. And you can see there are some default baseboard settings here that you can use. And all you've got to do is load one of these in. And then you can just use the same spline. So it's easy enough. You would just pick the same spline that the floor is used for. And you can see this is what would happen. In this case, it would go all the way around the floor to the open side, which is what I was talking about. But that's nonetheless, it is possible. Interesting, it hasn't got material ID. Oh, it hasn't got material ID. It's got a lot of different materials, but it hasn't got material ID restriction, which is something we should all add, actually. So we'll take note of that. But there's a bunch of these. They all pretty much behave the same way. They're very simple compared to the floors because they really only need to follow a spline. But the main difference is that with these, well, apart from we didn't have them before, is that we've got many more material options, but we've also got some basic controls for Y offset in case the splines aren't in the right place, and Z offset so that we can take it up and down, again, if the spline needs to be slightly offset. Just without having to edit the splines then. And you have got a padding start and a padding end, so you can pull the ends away if you need to from the start and the end. So that's those. And while I think about it, we've also got the ones for the ceiling, got coving, which do a similar thing. Or mouldings, I guess they might be called, in other territories. Which basically behave in exactly the same way, so that they follow a spline and create the moulding between the ceiling and the walls. But these are new and they're in there. And again, if there are more common styles that you would like to see, something you use regularly, then please let us know. We can build it right in. That said, they're very easy to edit, so you can easily add your own geometry if you need to. Have we got any other questions there, Jaime?
Nope. So let's move on.
Okay, just waiting for that to load up. There we go. So these work the same way as the floors. Ooh, that's a lot of lights. Just create a RailClone object, load it up. Here they are, mouldings. Now these come in a couple of categories. They're originally two libraries, but we've put them together and released them as one. So we've got at the bottom here what I would consider the classic mouldings, which are kind of an extrusion along the spline, some very sort of classical modern designs. But above that, we've got these can't be kind of extruded along a spline because they've got geometry that repeats. And these ones are probably the more interesting here and something RailClone is better at, or where RailClone would be absolutely necessary, because here we can click on these and instantly generate geometry. And the thing that's a little bit hidden in this, there is a slightly fiddly macro that we've created for you here, somewhere. Here it is. It calculates the corners so that when you've got a moulding like this, it doesn't on the corner accidentally slice halfway through one of these kind of little moulding bits, one of these arches or something, for example, and the same with the interior corners. And so there is a little bit of thought put into these to make sure that they're not simply arraying along the spline, just getting sliced exactly where the corner hits. They are being sliced in a way that is slightly logical to make sure it retains the repeating pattern. So it's just worth pointing that out because it might not be obvious if you're just using them, but that's been thought about. Cool. Okay, and then we've also added some more railing styles, and let's show you these in this scene. These new railing styles, I think, again, reflect our new approach to RailClone systems. We've got lots of other RailClone railings in the scene, in the library, sorry. But these ones have way more control, a lot more parameters that you can use. So they're in interiors again, they're glass railings. And let's pick, like, say, this classic railing here. In the past, these were fixed models. Yes, they went round corners, but you couldn't really adjust anything else about them. But now they are super parametric. So now, for example, we can control lots of the kind of attributes of this railing. So I can control this gap between the top of the glass and the handrail, for example. Obviously post spacing, that would have been in the originals, but that's in there too. We can also control the bottom rail height. So maybe your glass goes all the way down to the floor, as might happen sometimes. You can now change that if need be. You can change the height overall of the handrails. Of course, you can change the corner type. So at the moment, this is a continuous corner, but we could go for a jointed corner. And then you've got Y offset and Z offset in case you're sharing that spline, and you can use it for multiple different things. So you can see that's got lots more control than our normal railings. Let's have a look at another one. It's quite useful. So this one has more controls over these rails, for example. So here we've got a couple of glass rails in the middle, but maybe we don't want just two, maybe we want three. So we've got a setting for that, got a number of mid rails. I could change it. So now I've got those. I can change the gap between them, like so. I can change the bottom gap and the top, and so on and so forth, and then the overall height, obviously. So you can see this. These are really quite different from a static asset. You can really change them a lot. And there are a few of these, and in going forward, all of our RailClone systems are going to have as many parameters as this. We're going to try and make things fully configurable, which is why at the beginning, in the version of the introduction that you didn't get to hear because we were just talking to each other, I was saying that we sort of see each RailClone object or each RailClone system now as almost a little 3ds Max plugin. It turns RailClone into almost a plugin authoring system. I think that's a way of thinking about it. And so these are a set of railing plugins, if you like, with various parameters to help with your work. And the last, and probably one of my favorite styles that we've released recently, are the awnings. Of course, they have a particular usage for countries that need these kinds of awnings, but as parametric objects, I really like the way they work. Let me just make sure that's long enough. Make it a couple of meters long. Okay, so these work the same way, and you may have seen the video for these. And our awnings are also in the library, this time in exteriors, right at the top here, awnings. And you've got various different styles and color options. I'm just going to pick this one up here in the corner and just show you a few features of this. I can see a question there, I'll get to it in a minute. Make that a little bit bigger. Okay. So this is our procedural awning object. Again, it's got lots of controls, which you can see down here. I just wanted to talk these through. I don't think we've got a dedicated tutorial, but maybe we have. So the first thing is, let's change the max open to 100%. So that's fully open, that awning now. And then we can see a little bit clearer what happens. So the size parameter is the size of the awning when it's fully open. So at the moment, for example, we could set it to 200 centimeters, 2 meters, and that's what it is when it's fully open. And then the maximum open value controls actually what percentage of that maximum size is used by the opened awning. So using this, you can see we can now close the awning. And the difference clearly between these is that when we use the maximum open value, it folds in and the arms fold in, whereas when you control the size value, you're controlling the length of the arms and the awning itself. Okay, so that's the main difference. You've also got choices of fabric. Of course, you can use your own if the architect specifies something specific, but you've got choices of fabric here. If you can't see the choice changes in the viewports, by the way, that's because the viewport display mode is set to quick mesh, and in RailClone, quick mesh doesn't allow you to preview the material ID changes. So switch to mesh if you need to see that. You'll see it at render time, okay? It's just a viewport thing. So you've got various material controls which you can quickly change without having to load them from the library. So you can easily just tweak them here. And then we've also got random open and we've got random minimum maximum. So in order to see that, we need some more awnings. So one thing I would say is that this plays quite well with the standard array tool that's now included in Max. So I can array the spline, for example, maybe on the x-axis and on the z-axis. Give myself a bunch of awnings. There we go. Cool. So now we've got that, we can see the random open, for example. So we've got random open here. And if I turn that on, then now you can see all the awnings are open different random amounts. And these are controlled by the minimum open and the maximum open values. That makes sense. If random open is off, only the maximum open value sets the size. So that's the other one. And the other thing is we've got an angle setting. So you can see this, they're at a slight angle at the moment. If I change the maximum angle setting, I control everything. But if I turn on random angle, then it's going to go between the minimum and the maximum angle. That's probably too much of a difference. So those are two handy settings. If you combine these things, you're getting loads of randomization, especially if I then combine it with the random materials, you're getting loads of randomization in your scene. Another thing I wanted to mention, it's not obvious from just looking at these videos, and perhaps it's hard to see, but there is a very slight procedural catenary curve on these awnings. So they're actually bending as though under the influence of gravity. It's kind of hard to see, but it's subtly there. And as you can see, if I move the angle down, the bulge of the curve ends up nearer the bottom. As I move them up, it comes up to the center and then maybe back towards the other side. So that little catenary curve is just helping to add a little bit of subtle realism in there, and it's procedurally designed in RailClone using some of the new spline operator tools that we talked about in the last live stream. Cool, I can see a couple of questions, so I'm going to hold off there and then come back to look at those. Okay. So the first question there is, when converting to editable mesh, it creates new vertices which don't match the original mesh. Weird. Yeah, so that is when a piece of geometry has been sliced by either a corner or a clipping spline or something like that. And the Boolean function that is used by RailClone, which actually a built-in Boolean in Max, does on occasion add vertices here and there where the slicing is. It might also be there was a vertex in the original model that was hidden somehow, and just the conversion to mesh exposes it. But generally speaking, if you've got extra vertices, it's usually on the sliced edges, I would say. And the second question is it possible to enable RailClone clipping areas on the viewport or the camera view, just like ForestPack? Yeah, no, not currently. So what you mean is frustum culling there. So that's what I think you're talking about. So it's not something that's built into RailClone, and this has been asked before. There's a good reason for that, and it's because in RailClone, each object is placed in the array in relation to the preceding object in the array. Right? One is aligned based on its position in the array next to the other. If you take this one away, the others will slide across. So if we implemented culling in the same way as ForestPack, then the whole arrays would start to change. That's not to say it can't be done. It's to say that it's a much more complicated procedure to implement it. And likely the gains you would get in performance from implementing that would probably be minimal. So that's not to say it's not possible, and it might be possibly something we haven't got currently in the RailClone graph a way of knowing if something's in the camera frustum, but there might be ways of doing it with splines and things, because there is a way in RailClone now that allows you to hide a segment without removing its influence, so it just no longer renders. And actually I've got an example later that illustrates that, but not for a completely different purpose. Okay, so moving on to ForestPack. Let me just open a quick file. This was sort of quietly released when we updated for Max 2027, but I think it's one of the more useful little tool improvements that we've added recently. It doesn't add a load of new exciting features, but it just makes managing big scenes so much more convenient if you're using a lot of ForestSets, ForestIvy, and that kind of thing. Basically what we've done is added these extra ForestPack helper objects to the lister. So now if you pop open lister, which you can do using the button on the left hand side here for me, you can now see you've got a tabbed view which shows you ForestPack, Ivy, sets and LODs there.
Oh, I'm not sure if you're showing your screen.
Yeah, I've switched. It's okay. It's just the lag, Jaime.
Okay.
Yeah. This time it is. Last time it wasn't.
Okay.
So yeah, you can see that I've got those different tabs there, and it's just really a reminder that Forest Lister exists and is quite helpful as well, because not only does it list and allow you to pick objects very quickly, if you're seeing, obviously you'd have named them hopefully something more useful than I have here. It also lets you change the viewport display modes, batch to just change them, I should say. So you can select various different ForestPack objects and change the display modes from here. Say I wanted to show them all as proxies. You can do that quickly there. But it also lets you jump between the rollouts really quickly. So the approach we've done with Forest Lister wasn't to reproduce the settings you've got in ForestPack and mirror them in the lister. Instead, what you can do is you can click on any one of these tabs and it will take you to that specific rollout for that ForestPack object. So say I wanted to go to the surfaces rollout for ForestPack 3, I just click there and you'll see on the right hand side in the modify panel, it's taken me straight to the surfaces rollout. So I can jump between different parts, specific parts of ForestPack objects very quickly. Maybe I want to go to the areas rollout, camera rollout. I can jump between them very quickly by doing that. And you can also customize this view by clicking on the cog in the top right hand corner, so you can change what's listed for ForestPack in the lister there. So none of this is new. This is how Forest Lister was built for ForestPack in the first place. What's new, I say, is these new tabs here. So IVs is the same. If I wanted to go to the branches settings for a specific ForestIvy, I can just click it here and it takes me straight to it. I can also change the mesh display modes for ForestIvy here. Obviously the helper plugins like set and LOD have much smaller interfaces, only really one tab or one rollout, sorry. But you can very quickly pick them here too. So hopefully that'll speed things up a little bit. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is that sometimes when you get really heavy scenes, what you might do in a ForestPack object is to go into the display rollout, and you might have turned on manual update, for example. Now you might do that if the ForestPack objects are applied to a large surface that you're editing, and every time you change the surface, it's forcing ForestPack to rebuild and it's slowing down your editing. So you might have turned on manual update. If that's the case, and then you wanted to quickly update all your ForestPack objects, you can do that in Lister by coming into here, clicking on this little button here with the blue dots on it, select all, and then you click this button here that says rebuild selected objects, and that would automatically rebuild or manually update all of those ForestPack objects for you. It's also true you might want to do that if, for example, you've got surfaces applied, but you haven't turned on auto update, in which case, even if you had auto update on, you edit a surface, the ForestPack object won't necessarily update until maybe you hit render or something like that, but you can come in here, click this button, select all the ForestPack objects or the ones you want to select, and then hit this button to rebuild them. You can also select multiple ForestPack objects. If you've got them selected like this with the blue dots, you can click on this button on the left here to select them in the viewport. So you can select multiple ForestPack objects that way. Just wanted to mention those little bits just in case you weren't aware of them. Okay.
Little questions today. It's quiet.
It is quiet. It's a quiet one.
Yeah.
More questions.
Come on, guys. Yep.
I was going to share this one, but I think this is going to be more a thing for us, as it turns out. But we are supporting loading and saving ForestPack geometry in a proprietary format, .fp format. So this is what ForestIvy uses already, and soon our libraries will come in this format too. Now, this won't necessarily be something you'll use every day, but I wanted to just mention it because there is a little bit of a hack that might be useful if you, for example, use multiple 3ds Max versions and you need to save back a long way and you've got ForestPack installed on both, then you can use this proprietary format to go between them. So basically what you can do is you can select the objects, helps if I show the capture, you can select the objects and then you just go to export selected. And in here, there is now, if you've got the latest ForestPack installed, actually it's not quite yet, in the next few weeks you will have this, there's a .fp object type there, and that will save that geometry out as a kind of mesh format that is completely Max independent. So then I could then go back, as long as I had ForestPack installed in Max 2014 or something, I could re-import those objects with no problems, save that problem with saving Max back. But for us, it's a way of us saving our libraries in a way that is completely independent of whichever Max version people are using. So it just makes everything very easy. But I just thought I'd point it out in case you ever see it or you wonder what an FP format is in the future. We have a similar one for RailClone that I've talked about in the past. Okay. Another thing we got asked as soon as the last V-Ray came out was that can ForestPack support decals for V-Ray? And the answer is it already does. So we have made one small change. The reason people thought it couldn't was for one good reason, and I'll just show you what that is. But it's been there from the moment that V-Ray supported scattered decals, which was the decals, I should say, sorry, which was the last major update to V-Ray, I think. But let me just show you how this works. So I've got some decals. Maybe I want to scatter them on this road. So you can treat them exactly the same as you would do now. Maybe I can select these three here. I go to ForestPack. I turn on populate from selection in this case, and then just click to scatter. Now, there are a couple of limitations with decals in ForestPack that I'll mention. First one is that they display as little dots like this. So this is maybe something we'll look at, but at the moment, because they're considered non-geometric objects, they display as little dots, which is how lights and anything else that you scatter that isn't geometry displays in ForestPack. And it makes kind of sense, because if we were to display this 10,000 times, your viewports are not going to like you. But maybe we need to somehow tweak it so that the preview mesh is a similar size to the originals. But apart from that, that's pretty straightforward. You can rotate them and scale them just like you would any other object. And if you were to try this right now, you would say to me, Paul, it doesn't work. And the reason for that is, as it stands at the moment, you'd have to select these geometry objects and you have to tell ForestPack that it's a non-geometric object. So on the right-hand side here, there's a non-geometric object checkbox. And the idea of this is that it allows you to scatter more or less anything as long as the render engine supports it being instanced. So in the current versions of ForestPack, even if you're bang up to date, you would need to turn that on. In a few weeks, you'll use this version, which I've got installed, which you can see now detects V-Ray decal objects and doesn't require you to turn that on manually. But if you were to try this today, that's what would happen. So in the future, don't worry about it. For now, turn on non-geometric objects. And then you should see that they scatter fine, and I should get some little marks on those roads from those decals. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, in this case it's fine actually, but ForestPack uses the pivot point to align the object to the surface, and you can see the pivot point on a decal is right at the very, very bottom of the object, which means that if this surface isn't perfectly flat, and this one is, then bits of it may go underneath this bounding box, and therefore the decal won't be applied to those areas. So you've got two choices there. You can either kind of go in to this decal object and tweak the projection offset value, and you can see that pulls it down so the pivot point's in the middle, which is a bit tedious if you've got to do that a bunch of times. Or you can go to the ForestPack object, and what you could do instead is select everything in the geometry list and just go to Z offset, which is here, and just maybe just pull that down into the negative values a little bit. And that will just ensure that the projection box is intersecting with the surface on which you're scattering. So it's just a little tip there that I've noticed when that surface isn't perfectly flat, it sometimes misses little bits here and there. But apart from that, that's pretty much it. And you can scatter, as I say, as long as the render engine supports it. And Corona has allowed us to scatter decals with ForestPack for a long time because the render engine allowed it. And now V-Ray does too. So as long as the render engine allows it, if it's not a geometric object and you want to scatter it, you still can. This is how we do lights, by turning on a non-geometric object there, and it will automatically scatter for you. Okay.
We have one question. If we can talk about curved windows from RailClone.
Oh yeah, that's time. Assad is yes. Assad, I have you on my list. That's Assad sent me an email earlier in the week with a specific case for today, and well, we'll talk about it later, but we'll tackle it, it's about creating windows with curved tops procedurally. So which proves
that these live streams are to answer people's questions.
Yeah, exactly. They all are. Yeah, I mean everything's in response to something. So another question we got asked was obviously another thing that Chaos updated recently was adding a parallax map to their shaders library, but also adding various parallax maps to Cosmos, as well as using parallax maps which are available from third parties. There are some really good ones out there. And does that work with RailClone? And it does. And there's no demo really here in terms of instruction. I need to prove that it works. You can just import a parallax object from the library, just like you would any other object, and use it because it's just a plane, right, with a material applied, and use it inside of RailClone. So this is a RailClone style. You can see it's pretty much perfectly flat. It's got parallax maps at the back here. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll try and explain, but I think probably everyone does. There's nothing fancy about this RailClone style at all. But basically what a parallax map is, if I turn on IPR, hopefully this won't crash my computer, it is a fake 3D interior here. So you can see these interiors look like they've got depth, and if you move the camera around, they move in parallax, as it were. So you can see the walls and the windows and depth in there, even though in reality these have no depth whatsoever. And you can see here are the original maps over here that are being used. So these have just been added to RailClone the normal way, and I've just randomized between them for a randomized modifier and stuck them into my building graph. So it's going to be a really nice way to quickly create big buildings that look like they're populated. So they're not new technology. Third parties have got loads of nice maps that you can get. I think it's called W Parallax or something like that. But Chaos have added a few now to the library as well, and added a dedicated map type to load them. So you're not having to depend on a kind of OSL map to load them up. But they're quite handy. Let me just stop that. And you can see the graph is nothing at all, but I've just randomized between them here. Okay, we're fully into RailClone territory now. Okay. So this was your question, how to procedurally generate arched windows. And we've obviously covered creating normal windows in the past, and there are a few tutorials online, and we will do more because I know it's a popular request. But arched windows is a head scratcher, and this is only the specific problem that was asked was, how do you create a window that fits along an X spline So it's controllable width on the next spline. It's got a controllable height, and then it's got an arch on top of it that will scale correctly so that it fits along that spline as well. And actually, I'm really grateful for this question because, and this often happens with support cases and questions for the live stream and so forth, what it revealed was it was sort of possible, but there was also a limitation in the existing version of RailClone that meant I couldn't do what I'm doing now and have a subspline or multiple subsplines, each of which has got a different width. And thanks to your question, Assad, we worked that out, and we've now fixed it. And this isn't currently live, this version, but give it a week or two, you'll have this. And now you can see this is possible. Now you can't, because I haven't switched screens, but here you go. Now you can see this is possible, right? So I've got 3 subsplines, each of which has got a different width, and each of which has a curve on top, which is adapting to the length of the spline. And I can also control the height separately. So this hopefully is the effect that you were asking about. So I haven't done this, let me just talk this through. I haven't done this by creating any splines apart from the base splines in the scene. And in Assad's example, he was, and it's perfectly valid, he was creating a curve for the top and then a sort of version for the underneath, and then bringing both those pieces into RailClone and then piecing them together, or trying to piece them together. But the trouble with that was you had splines in the scene that you needed to control from inside the graph, and that's not possible. But since the last version of RailClone, the last major release of RailClone, what we've got now is the ability to generate splines directly in the RailClone graph and do things like Booleans to them. So I'm just going to, rather than build this up from scratch, and maybe we'll do that in another tutorial when I've got the frames and everything, because obviously this is just a basic demo, right? But you get the idea. I'll just show you kind of how this works. So first of all, let's turn that off because that's just the glass. And let's unplug that. No, that needs to stay plugged in, sorry. Let's keep that plugged in. Okay, so at this end here on this graph here, I've called it main generator, and this has got the spline connected, which is just the subspline that's at the bottom of all these windows. Okay, that's what that is. And that's all that's doing. And then plugged into the start input, I've got a nested generator. Now it's in the start input so that it puts whatever I put in there at the very beginning of each spline, then doesn't repeat it. So it'll only put it in once at the start of each subspline. That's why I put it in the start input. Now into here, into this generator, which is what's being used to create this frame, this is where I've added splines directly in RailClone. So what you can see here is that here I've got a circle, a circular spline, which was originally a full circle. And then this comes into a translate node, which moves it into position. So it's translating it up and to the right into position. So it's on top of the rectangle. And then it's putting it through a Boolean node to combine it with this spline. And this spline is a rectangle. So effectively what I've got is a rectangular spline here, which is being combined with a circular spline here. They're being Boolean directly inside of RailClone to create this one shape. Then that is being used to feed this linear array. And the sizes of those are being driven by this arithmetic node. And all this is doing is saying, hey, in this generator here, how long is this spline section? How long is that? So that's what that's doing. It's getting that length there. And then it's using that length there, dividing it in half to get the radius of the spline at the top there. And it's dividing it in half again to get the X translation, because otherwise it would, the middle of the circle would be there. Okay, so it's moving it across and into position. So it's using that value. And then it's also used, this value is also being used to set the width of the rectangle that's being used to create the bottom half of that window. So you can see here it is going into the rectangle width here too. So that's basically how that rectangle is created. They're Boolean together, and then the actual thing is just a box that goes around that spline. So that's easy enough. And then the only other thing I'm doing here really is getting the height of the window, which is just a parameter, and that's being used to drive the height of the array, height of the rectangle there, minus the radius, so the rectangle doesn't go all the way up to the top, and then chopping the top part off, bringing it down there. And it's being used, this height, to offset this circle on the y-axis to push it up to the top of the window. So it's being moved along and then up into position. So I've just moved them procedurally, but it's all done fully procedurally based on the length of these base splines. And that's really it. And that probably sounds more complicated than it is, but it's fairly simple. When you're putting it together, it's fairly simple because you are rationally trying to think about how to position those splines and trying not to use real hard-coded measures to try and make that happen. And then the same spline, which is this, remember this shape, is being fed into this 2D array here. And this 2D array has clipping areas on, so it'll automatically fill that array with whatever. And I've just got a simple box, which would be your glass, going into that there, and it's being clipped at the edges. So that's pretty straightforward. They're being combined with this compose operator, groups, and then being rotated into position, because if I turn that off, they'll lay down flat. So it's being rotated into position like that. Okay, so that's the logic of what's going on there, and I'll happily put this file somewhere and link to it in the comments, in the description, so that people can have a look at it and work it out for themselves. And once I think I've got a better example of this, which maybe has got glazing bars and so forth in there too, maybe record a tutorial on how to do that, and maybe create some macros to simplify the process for you too, so you don't have to think about it all so much. But that is the basic approach for creating this kind of thing. As you can see, it's sort of working quite well now. You could always add markers to these so that you can have different height windows instead of having them all the same. There's loads of control now that we've got the system working. But this wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't added the ability to create shapes directly in the RailClone graph, which we did in the most recent big update to RailClone. You can see here there's a shape node, and you can do lines, rectangles and circles, just a few shapes, but you can do an awful lot with them. Can you make the shapes visible? That is a good question. Yes, you can. So if you come into display, I'm not sure exactly what it will show here. It might only show the end result, but there is an option that says draw splines. And if you click that on, it might, oh, where are they? They're probably in the middle of the scene somewhere. Have I hidden splines? It might not, because I think it only shows the splines of the end of the result of the graph. So I think possibly it's not going to display those. You can see that those ones are being displayed, but not those currently. I'll look into that, but normally you can see them. The thing is, these shapes won't be being created here. They'll be being created wherever that was generated in the first place, which will be in the middle of the world space. I think they'd be there, but they're not displaying, so. Okay. Anyway, I hope that is kind of what you were looking for, Asad, and I hope it's helpful for people. But I say I will record a more detailed, like exact step by step. But if I was to talk through this a node at a time, we'd be here for the rest of the live stream. But the principle is hopefully, I think, pretty easy to understand. Cool. No other questions?
Nope.
So I had another interesting question, which was how to create diagonal braces on wooden fences. And this was one of those questions you think, oh, that'll be easy. And then you start doing it and think, why isn't this easy? Let me show you what I meant. It's again another one where we might add a macro. So this is, again, simplified. It's always good when you're trying to work out logic problems, just to not work with too complicated geometry, just simplify the scene. So what specifically was wanted was these braces that you get on wooden fences, and you usually encounter them at the starts and the ends and on corners. So this is pretty typical for your kind of agricultural fence that you see everywhere. And a nice way to make these believable is to add these here. Now that might seem easy, but it gets a little bit trickier when you want to control the evenly distance, because then they need to scale. Okay, and they're not scaling everywhere; they're only scaling in either side of the corner and at the start and the end. And there isn't an input in RailClone for either side of the. There's an input for corner. There's not an input for the one before the corner and the one after the corner. So we kind of have to deal with that. So let me just open this style here, and maybe this one I will talk through actually. What I'm going to do is keep that node there and delete everything else. Okay. So this is our basic fence. You can see everything before the braces is there. I've got my posts and I've got whatever would happen in the middle. That might be bars or something else. But we want to create these diagonal braces. So the first thing we want to do is don't bother trying to do it in this graph. If you start trying to put something here in this generator, sorry, if you start trying to put something here, it's going to push this default piece out of the way. This piece of geometry, the fence, is going to end up with a gap there and stuff like that. So the first tip in RailClone is don't be afraid to break stuff up into multiple nodes. So in that case, I'm going to duplicate this like that. Okay, I'm just going to shift and copy it, which again is a shortcut from Max that we've introduced into RailClone. And now I'm going to right click on this one and I'm going to isolate it. It's another recent addition. So now I'm only seeing this particular graph, this particular node. And now I'm going to remove the default because I don't need that there anymore. I'm just left with the posts. So now I can really think about what I want to do. So the first thing is that let's think about where we want these diagonal braces. Here's our diagonal brace. What I want to do is to put them in the start and the end inputs. But I can't.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm afraid you're not sharing screen.
It's such a lot of fun for that.
Exactly. And we have a great question once you're done with this.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yes, I mean, that would deserve another live stream.
Yeah. What I would question at this point is whether you need to use RailClone, ForestPack, and why can't you just use RailClone for the people too, but we'll talk about that in a second. I've actually got an example of something similar. Okay, so I'm going to go back over whatever waffling I just did. Okay. Hey, let's have a chat while 3ds Max restarts after crashing. Okay. Just let 3ds Max restart. So there isn't currently a way of connecting. There isn't currently a way of connecting RailClone to ForestPack in a kind of way that is built into those two. They can't kind of talk to each other. It's something we've talked about, and it's kind of somewhere in our wish list. But currently, there's not a way for that to happen. But what you can do, and what we've done in the past, is that ForestPack has a mode where it can place an object on every triangle, okay, on every triangle of a mesh. And so what you do is you create a RailClone object where every seat is represented by a single triangle. And that can be linked to your seating RailClone too, so those two things track each other. And then you use that triangular version of the RailClone mesh as a source for ForestPack, and then that places the objects with ForestPack. It's a little bit of a weird workaround, but it does work, and perhaps if I've got time I can show that. But I would also say you might be easier with RailClone. I can see the follow-up question thing there is you might use that because materials are easier to manage with ForestPack, and unless I'm missing something, and there's another thing you're talking about, I would say that used to be the case because ForestPack didn't need you to create a big multi-sub-object material, and RailClone does. But RailClone also now allows you just to pick the materials off the source geometry. So the materials question shouldn't be an issue. Assad's comment there, which ForestPack supports animation, that is a good answer, because you're absolutely right. We can't randomize the animation with RailClone, but we can with ForestPack. So I would say materials, unless I'm missing something, probably not an issue. Animation, that is when you would need to use that technique.
Didn't we have something on the Independence Day reel regarding this? I remember
Yeah,
people
but
sitting on stadiums and
they were
jumping.
totally, yeah. So the Independence Day reel used loads of ForestPack to scatter all the people, but they weren't connected specifically to a RailClone object. They were just scattered along splines.
Okay.
But if you want them really placed carefully on seats, then that would be
It's funny because today I shared with Paul a Facebook question on the Slack channel that I think it has to do with this, right?
Do you know what? I didn't get a chance to read it because I was. You'll have to tell me what it was.
So I have stadium that needed custom seats for a job. Blah, blah, blah. Spline for my seats, scattered to follow. So I guess he's talking about the same, right?
Similar thing. Could be the same.
Yep.
Shape. Okie dokie. So we're back here.
Would it be possible to use imported Alembic as surfaces for scattering?
I'm surprised that's not possible. So I've not tried it though, but if it's geometry in 3ds Max, it should be. And if it's not working, then I don't think it's come to our attention. So if perhaps email us as well, but we can also look at that as well. I didn't know that wasn't possible. Okay, back to our braces. So we've got our sticks here, and we've got the duplicated RailClone graph, and I've just detached the default input, and now I've just left with the sticks. So the way you would normally do this would be to create a compose operator, wire it to the start, for example, here, and then we would wire the diagonal brace into the second part of that compose operator, and then wonder why it's not working. Sequential. Well, that's because it's not on the screen. There you go. So then you would get this, and you can see the situation is this diagonal brace it's not scaling. It doesn't fill this gap because it's in the start, and the start doesn't really know how, even if I change this mode to scale, which it is already, it's not going to scale that segment because it's in the start input, not in the default input. So that's the issue. So the issue is that we need to find the this size between this post and the next post, and we need to find it procedurally. And there is easily a way to do that. Okay, so there are a couple of modes that I've hidden in this macro, and probably I'll provide this macro at some point built into RailClone to save you coding it, but we can just quickly look at it. It's basically given me a few different options. Okay, so in this macro, I'm putting the post value, or post geometry, sorry, and the diagonal brace. Then I'm putting it through a couple of different expressions and then outputting 3 different options at the end, but they're all basically doing the same thing. So I'm taking the X size of the post, that's the thickness of the post, and I'm putting it in an arithmetic node. And then the crucial thing here is this setting here. You see it says X section length. So that's X section length. That is the length of the section from the start of the spline, which is here on the left-hand side of this post, to the middle of this post here. Okay. So that's the length of the spline, but of course those posts are in the way too. I need to take those into consideration. There's a whole post width at the beginning and a half post width at the end. So you can see that's why I've put take the X section length and subtract from that the post size, that's input 1, the post thickness times 1.5. That's what that's doing. Then I'm wiring that to the X size. It's fine, you can do that. I'm wiring that to the X size of the diagonal brace, and then sticking it into this start end output. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. And then if I take this here, this macro, and I take the start end output and wire that into there, you can see that snaps into place. Okay, so I've just basically found this value using an expression, and I've just used this macro because otherwise all these bits and pieces of the graph were going to be in here, and it was going to make this very cluttered and hard to read. So I've just put it all in a macro to tidy things up. So then we could do the same thing for the end. So we could copy this compose operator down, wire it into the end, and then change the order. So now we've got that in the end too. So that's nice and easy. And then the corner before and after here, these need separate sizes. But what I would do is to create another compose operator, put it in the corner input, and then I'm going to take the corner before and wire that into there. Now actually it's put it after, so I need to move it up so it's above the post. And then I want to take corner after and wire it into the third input. So now you can see, and we'll ignore, well, not worry about that too much at the moment. Now you can see I've got the post in the middle. So whatever's in the middle of a compose operator will end up dead on the corner. And then I've got the others on either side. Now clearly I need to mirror one of those. So we've got a mirror node in RailClone. I can quickly copy that over and flip that around. And you can see it's found the sizes automatically. So that's handy. Now one thing about the corner here, and the reason I had to use these different sizes is because the corner is here on this vertex, and this is a length after that vertex, and this is a length before that vertex. So on a corner, the section size that it will read using that expression I used earlier is the one before the corner. But luckily, if I come into here somewhere, this one, you can see there's another expression which is x section next length. So that will always read the length of the following area. And that's what I used to find that length there. And that's how that works. Now, if you recall, in this generator, we've got the posts already. In fact, the whole fence is in this generator. Here, I've turned it off for now. So actually in this generator, we only want the braces. We don't want the post. Otherwise, the geometry will be on top of one another. You know, you're going to get all kinds of rendering artifacts. So how do we get rid of those posts without, as I said, without all the gaps closing up and everything going wrong? Well, there is a way of doing that, and it's relatively new again. So I can take a transform node in, I can wire it to all of the, I have to attach a few manually. I can wire it to all of the inputs to this generator. Is that one? I think so. And that one there. Yep. And then if I come into the deform settings and turn on override deform, there's a renderable option there. And this is what I was talking about earlier with the ability to hide things from the render without them affecting the layout. If I turn that off, they just disappear. They're still being used for the calculations, but they no longer appear. And that's a really handy way of using geometry without perhaps having to export the X size and the Y size and the Z size. You can just use the geometry itself and then hide it afterwards. Then if I turn this other generator back on, I'll just turn off isolate. Then we've got our completed fence. But it's just about finding that size. Okay, let me just answer quickly, because that was a direct question in the chat. Let me just answer quickly that question about using ForestPack with RailClone. So the way that works is that, like I say, you would have to create in RailClone, you'd have to create a kind of helper version of RailClone, like a helper object. And that would have a triangle like so. Let me just turn that off. Which is going to be where the ForestPack object sits. Now the ForestPack object will sit on the center of that triangle, and it will follow the direction of the triangle along its longest side. So you can see I've deliberately made the triangle longer in this direction. That's telling me now that when ForestPack orients this object to this triangle, it will face in that direction. If you start doing something like this, it might not know which way to go. So it's going to go like this. And then we can use that in RailClone. So let's just very quickly add a RailClone object. I haven't done this for years. Interesting question. Create a RailClone object, pop open the style editor, let's import our scene objects, linear array, and say evenly. And let's just turn down the evenly setting. Okay. So there we've got a RailClone object that's producing triangles. Now these could be your seats. So you would have the same evenly setting for your triangles, exactly the same evenly setting as your seats. And then you would also want, you know, the, well, depending on where the pivot is on the forest objects, you'd either want them on where the seats are or on the floor at the bottom of the chair, but that will depend on how you're aligning your pivots. Okay, so then to target that with a ForestPack object, what we would do now is create a ForestPack object. And let's just generate in icon mode a ForestPack object. Let's, for old time's sake, scatter a teapot. And then add that to ForestPack. Okay, lovely. And then in distribution mode, we would go to reference and pick the RailClone object as a reference object. And then here you see there's an option that says distribute using either pivot or mesh faces. If we turn on mesh faces, we should get one teapot on every mesh face. Now you can see they're kind of higgledy-piggledy and irregular, and that's just a default setting. So that's this randomized position setting. If I turn that off, then you can see they all align to that triangle, exactly to that triangle. And you see align and scale are ticked on, so you would probably want, the scale won't affect it actually, but align will. So you just want to leave those on, and that's it. You know, those are connected now. If I go back to the original RailClone object, let's just click on that. Then when I update this, the ForestPack object should update as well. So it's here actually. So if I start updating this, that should work as well. There's only one caveat, and I can't remember how this quite works in most recent ones, but if you wanted to be absolutely sure that things don't go wrong, because at render time, it might turn this RailClone object into instances, and then it's not a single mesh that you're attached to RailClone anymore. So in that case, you want to turn off use instancing engine, and you probably also want to enable viewport mesh mode in case you create hundreds of these things. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You can see if I were to increase the size of this, you can see the ForestPack and the RailClone object both updating. Also, if I started to randomize the rotation, for example, of those triangles, then ForestPack should follow as well. So whichever way your seats face, your ForestPack object would follow those triangles. I hope that makes sense.
You have a couple of questions, Paul.
Cool.
Last live stream, you shared a new system for stairs. Did we share a new system?
I don't know if it was a system. It was definitely a demo of stairs.
That should be an example, yeah.
Yeah, it was an example. We have never, I mean, stairs are something we would like to do as a system, but they're so, in real life, there's so many variations and they're so tricky geometrically that it's getting one that suits kind of everyone is quite tricky. That said, I think recent changes have made it a lot easier. So what we might do, what I'd like to do is a simplified set of macros to help people build stairs rather than provide a system, because I think that'll be easier. Sorry, Jaime, go on.
Do you know if Arnold will get full instancing engine support for the material and or UVW operators?
And this is another case of I thought that was supported, because Arnold is one of the ones that we have SDK access for, unlike Corona, for example. And I thought therefore it was something we could add, but maybe there are limitations in Arnold that means not. It's another one I'll have to check, just mental note to check that, see if that works or not. But I'm guessing if you're asking that question, it doesn't. And so, and in any case, like certain things still work, but you're right, you lose instancing support. So you can still use the material and the UVW operators, but you can't use instancing. So on those parts of the mesh. So that's something we need to check, basically.
I guess that's all.
Limbic and selecting as a scatter surface is added to the list. However, the viewport doesn't update with any proxies. Okay. I mean, sometimes that's normal direction and that kind of thing. Okay, it's limit marked on the RailClone. Then I need to check that. Okay, thank you. So the question there was, haven't checked personally, but it's still marked in the RailClone docs as a limited support for Arnold. So I need to double check.
That's a good one. And docs is something.
Yeah, we'll
get to review.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you want to say that, Jaime, but we're like planning a big rewrite of all our documentation.
Without AI, by the way.
Without AI.
I want to make that clear.
You making it clear to me or to them?
No, everyone. I mean, of course.
This is less of a demo, just more of a like fun thing. I think it's been asked on the forum a few times, but I don't think we ever covered it here. But someone wanted something they could render that had measurements on it with RailClone, and it's not that easy to do with, because RailClone doesn't have it has a kind of geometry scripting system, but not in the sense that it can output like text strings, if you like, that we converted to text. But nonetheless, as with everything, you can do what you want with RailClone. So in this example, you can see here I've got an arrow that does have a meter measure. Obviously, you could customize this however you want with whatever geometry you want, and it's measuring the length of that spline. So you could create a measuring system with RailClone, and this is another thing that we maybe will bundle up as a macro, because it's not a hard macro to create, but it's just tedious to create because it's got a lot of nodes. I'll show you in a second. But as a style, it's fairly straightforward. You've got a size control, so you can control the size of it. You could, of course, easily add controls so that the text and the arrows are independently styled. You could have different arrowheads and so on and so forth. None of those things would be hard to do. The tricky bit there was to get the actual number bit working, unbelievably, because, like I say, it doesn't have text strings. So what I did was created this macro for the customer. And what this does is it just takes a piece of geometry for each number, because again, we can't generate geometry in RailClone. We can only assemble geometry that pre-exists. So I've got a number of different numbers from 1 up to 9, then 0, and then I've got C and M, centimeters or meters, and a full stop. And actually, this macro, I seem to recall, it lets me switch between centimeters and meters. Yes, it does. So we could do a similar one for Imperial. If there's interest, let me know, and we'll try and get it to you somehow. But it's sort of essentially it looks complicated, but it's essentially using a bunch of selector operators, and it's just using modulo functions to try and find how many ones, how many tens, how many hundreds, how many thousands, and so on and so forth are in that number. And then for that part of the number, it outputs the correct digit. So it's just a lot of nodes, but it's just loads of repetition, really. So tedious to set up, but once you've got a macro, easy to use, very easy to use. So if it's of use to people, it might be limited use, but if it is of use, let us know, and we will put it somewhere so you can access it and make your own styles with it. How we do for time, Jaime? I've completely not looked at my watch.
We've been around for 1 hour and 20 minutes now.
1 hour and 20 minutes. Okay. That's maybe a bit long. Okay, well, there was just a couple more questions. So one, let's see how I get on with this one. Maybe I won't talk all the way through every detail of this one again, but just go over how it was put together. But this is a question about, it's similar to the seating one, actually, we were talking about earlier. How do you put people on seats? And how do you create interiors with people and seats and randomized desks and so on and so forth? So this is the kind of end result. I've over randomized it just to illustrate, but it's basically a grid of tables with various chairs, up to 4 chairs around there, and then some people sat on some chairs. Some tables have more chairs than others, and so on and so forth. But it's all done with RailClone, and it's all procedural. And it was just how to set that up, really. That was the question, and it was another interesting question because it's another one that uses the recently introduced shape nodes. So you can see a shape node, which is a circle. And actually, if I just detach this, I think will that work? Yeah, they're down here. So if I detach this sub generator here, you can see really all that's happening is I've got my shape node here, which is just a circle. Let's see if you can see it. Shape splines. Yeah, now we can see it. Okay, so now you can see my circle that's being generated inside of Rail. Sorry, I haven't switched screens. Okay, so this is what it looks like. And you can see, like I said, it's got maximum randomization going on here, and you can see the graph here, which is not terribly complicated. So what I wanted to point out is that each one of these tables is circular, obviously, and has chairs around each side of it. And we wanted to array people around a circular spline, basically, but without having to create a spline in the scene, because then we can't control it, we can't procedurally control it, and so on and so forth. So this is somewhere where our newly created shape nodes can be helpful. So I'm going to detach the nested generator so that it shows up at world origin down here. I know. I can see all the comments coming in about changing my screen. I've already done it. Sorry about that.
It should be working.
Yeah, they're just it's a bit delayed. So I can see that down there. And this is where I think Asad asked this question earlier. How do I see the splines? Here's the draw splines option. Because it's the end of an array, I will see it this time. So now you can see I've got a spline showing how this works. So in this generator, it's very straightforward. I've got a shape node, which is my circle. I've set the radius to 100 centimeters, but I could set it to anything. And it goes into a spline ops node. And that spline ops node allows me to translate or transform, and allows me to do loads of things. But in this case, it's allowing me to transform that spline. And specifically what I'm doing actually in this case is adding some random rotation. So I'm randomly rotating that spline, which means the chairs won't end up on exactly the same side of every table. So I'm just popping that in there and randomizing it. And if you look at this, it's just randomizing between 0 and 360 and generate on generator. And that's because I want it to generate every time it's used by this end generator here. So that's simple, right? That's nothing particularly fancy there. And then if we come and look at what's in the evenly input, that's the tables, the chair and the person sat on the chair. And the evenly input is set to a count of 4. So there's potentially four people around each table. There. That's how that's working. Then if I come to this end, what I've got is all my people here, and they're wired into a randomized node. So I'm just randomizing between several lounging people. And I've got a single chair, which is here. And these are both wired into a compose node, which is in group. And that means its pivots will align. So the pivots of the people, which are set to the bottom center, and the pivots of the chair, also set to the bottom center, will align and group them together. So for every chair, I'm getting a randomized selection of these 6 people. Plus this at the bottom here, which is just a transform node with override fixed size on. And what that means is if that gets picked, you'll just have an empty chair. It'll just be a simple blank chair because it's picked nothing, essentially. So this compose node is wired into a mirror because it was facing the wrong way, and then another randomized node. And this randomized node is wired to this same null transform node, which is why I'm missing a chair on this corner here. So if I just remove that, you can see now I've got that person back. If I pull it back in again, I've got a different random selection this time. I've just got 2 chairs, but that's the same principle. And then this is all wired into a transform node, and this transform node is being used to randomize the translation, rotation, and scale. So I'm just randomly adding a bit more chaos to those people. So that's effectively what this generator is doing. It's creating the chairs, it's randomly taking some of them away, and it's randomly creating some of the people away, and it's scattering them 4 around a circle. Now then this is wired to another compose node, which has the table. And if I wire that into there, now it's up here. And you can see all these people are very, very, very messy office this, but they're all scattered around the chairs. If there are too many empty chairs, as there are, I can come back to this randomized node and I can turn down the number of empty tables by changing the probability of that empty transform node. So these are for your compose node, like I say, and then this is doing something. I'm not sure what this is doing actually. Oh, it's rotating by 90 degrees. Why it's doing that? Not sure that's important. And then it's going into this segment X, Y roll. Sorry, now you might wonder why that is. And that's because I've got a 2D array here, and I want to place these chairs at the intersection of the X and the Y evenly segments. And there's not an easy way to do that without this macro. Now, this is a built-in macro. If you go to the macros tab and go to logic, and I think it's in selectors, no, array attributes. Yeah, segment Y roll, it's there. Okay. And it always goes into a vertical input. So this is in the X evenly input. And in the Y evenly input, just so that RailClone knows I'm using Y evenly, I've put another transform with override fixed size on another null segment parent, basically. And now what you can do is you can create basically a grid of objects, because what I'm saying is with this Y roll thing, I'm basically able to target different bits of the array that aren't available in the list that's in the A2S array. So normally I've only got access to evenly. But with this, what I've got access to is the default, where the evenly and default cross, where the top and the evenly cross, where the bottom and the evenly cross, where the marker and the evenly cross, and where the evenly and the evenly cross, which is what we're looking for. And that means I can control this grid now by just changing the evenly on the X and on the Y. So it's quite a flexible little system. Obviously, I would turn off bend and slice for all these objects. They shouldn't be bent anyway, for maximum instancing. And this is a scenario where you've managed to combine. It's interesting that question came up, but you can combine seating, not animated. That's true, but you can combine seats and people directly in RailClone without having to kind of get ForestPack involved. And you've got use instancing engineer, and if you turn on use segment materials up here in the style rollout, you also don't need to think about consolidating the materials manually. It'll just pick them off the source geometry. So it's quite nice for very quickly laying out offices or restaurants or whatever, this kind of little trick. So that was an interesting question. And then I did have one last very quick thing, Jaime, if you'll permit me the time.
Of course.
Which is nothing to do with our plugins at all. But it was a question that came up when TyFlow updated recently.
You're asking, Paul, I mean, Assad is asking if this would work in a circle shape.
Do you mean a circular layout, Assad, or because that was a circular shape, the desk was circular, and so they went around a circular desk. In a circular layout, it should work. It should work. You would have to, in this case, you wouldn't use a clipping spline to fill the area. You would use a circle as the X spline, and then a Y size to kind of scatter inwards, to make the array come in towards the center or out from the middle, whichever way. And then you could do it like that. And I think there's an option to treat each row separately if you didn't want them all to be aligned like spokes coming out from a wheel. So each row can be calculated independently based on its own size. So that should be possible. So the question was, this is such a long question that my little video is in the way of it. Let me turn that off. Have you seen the new TyFlow satellite importer, and does it work with ForestPack? So I imagine most people have seen this, but if you haven't, I just wanted to show you it quickly because it's super cool and it does work with ForestPack, but you have to set it up in a particular way to scatter on it. So I won't take long doing this. It's very easy to use, but it's very interesting. So if you haven't seen this, as far as I know, and don't quote me on it, as far as I know, it works with the free version of TyFlow. It just won't be like most features of TyFlow in the free version, they're just not multi-threaded. So, excuse me, as far as I know, this works. So we bring up our TyFlow. Now, I'm sure most of you know that TyFlow's got some pretty cool terrain tools so that you can design terrains directly inside of TyFlow. And it saves you from having to kind of build them height maps outside of 3ds Max and then import them and everything. And also it means that you can create a fully procedural workflow directly in Max. Excuse me, just have a drink of water. Whereby you can update the terrain in Max, and anything you've scattered on it will also all update in real time. So let's start with creating a new TyFlow terrain. I'm just going to create one from scratch because this is very straightforward. So I'm going to create birth terrain. Actually, do you know what? Before I do that, and before you work on this scale, you might want to change your, and it's in meters, that's fine. Okay. You might want to change your system unit setup, I was going to say. So this is a birth terrain. You see this creates a blank terrain surface, and you've got a resolution you can say here, which is 1024 resolution at the moment, which will be good enough for the minute. You can always increase it later. And a scale, which sets the height, but we'll leave that as defaults. In fact, I would leave everything here as its defaults. And the thing that TyFlow added recently, which is cool, is for us, as people creating environments, is the, let me try and find it now, terrain download operator. So we'll just drag that up here into our graph. And this launches a TyTerrain downloader window. So I'm just going to pop that open. Now, if you're lucky enough to have API keys to some of the major providers here, then you can enter them here and then you can access their maps. Otherwise, you can use the maps that are here by default. But what this is going to let us do is to import the height data and the satellite data from anywhere in the world and build a terrain directly inside of Max, one that can be updated and one that you can further process using the terrain tools available to you in TyFlow. And you can scatter on it too. So you basically open up like this, you'd find a little bit of land. I think I found going to go for a bit of Scotland, I think. Let's try this bit here. You draw a box around it, like so. And one thing I do like to note is the size. So over here on the right hand side, it's giving you your coordinates in the world basically, and then it's telling you the dimensions of that space. So it's 23.8 by 23.8 kilometers that I've got going on there. So just remember 23 kilometers. I will almost certainly forget that. And then the other things you might want to look at on the side here are the height map data set and your color data set. So where are you getting your color textures from and where are you getting your height map textures from? And in terms of these, automatic is probably a good option. This one, obviously these are different levels of quality, and basically it's how much space in real life does a pixel represent. So the lowest setting there is every pixel of your height map represents 10 meters of real geography, but that's only available in the US as far as I know, but I think we can go up to 30 in Scotland, so we'll go to 30 for now. And then the color data set, I will leave it on every satellite, and then down here it's going to tell me the estimated output, the texture output of the height map in particular here. And what I do then is click download terrain texture, and that's showing me a little preview of that height map and the satellite map, and then you hit apply. And then here we have our texture. I'll just drag that out of the way somewhere. Actually, I'll just close it. Okay, so here we have our shader, our terrain imported. Now, this is being colored currently by using vertex colors. So that's at the moment, this isn't generating a mesh. This is still a TyFlow object, and I can't actually scatter on it. It won't be visible to ForestPack at the moment. What you'd need to do is to add a terrain mesh operator under that, and then we will output it to a mesh. But we've lost our colors, and that's because we've lost the geometry that TyFlow was creating, or with the vertex colors on it. So what we need to do now is to generate a shader that has those colors. Now, if you come back to the terrain download, you can see that you've got the two maps available to you here. And so what you can do is open the material editor. Let's just drag it out the way somewhere. Not that one. And we can just pop this color texture over here, instance it in, convert it to V-Ray, whatever you want. You can see it here. Seems okay. And then use that in whatever shader you like. One minute, I'll catch up. There we go. Diffuse and sign that. Okay. So now we have a textured surface, real geometry in 3ds Max that we can scatter on. And we can increase the resolution if we need to. Just come back up here, 2048. We can change the location if you need to. So you can easily pop back open the train download tool and change it, and whatever. So we can do that. The only catch is the birth trains, when you load them in, are very, very small. So 200, I say very small, but 250 meters in this case. So what we would want to do, therefore, is to scale this up to the real size that it was in real life if we wanted real world measurements. And you can do that by dragging in a terrain transform tool here. And then there's an absolute scale here. Now this is in world units. So this is 250 meters currently. That's what this is. And it was, can't remember what it was now. Some amount of kilometers, 33 was it, I said? So we want it to be 33, let's say, kilometers. which is obviously going to make it massive. But now we have terrain which is approximating the size that it would be in the real world. That's just an easy way of fixing it. And the trick there was to use the absolute scale. And now you've got that, you can easily scatter on it with ForestPack, just as you would anything else. So go to 3D garden, summer trees, doesn't really matter. Any old tree will do. Obviously this is a huge area and I'm going to regret scattering on it, but it gives you an idea that it's possible. I managed to choose a really high resolution tree. Okay. So yeah, it's a big area, so I'm hitting my maximum number of everything. So in order to scatter on it, I would have to be quite careful to optimize this. I'm going to turn my max items down. I'm going to turn my max items off there. Let's see what I can do. Can I bring any trees in? Pyramid. At some point I'll get some trees. Hang on, that feels promising. Hey, there we go. So it's, like I said, it's a huge area. If you think that's the size of a fir tree, then we've got a lot of. But anyway, so you can see that it works. We're scattering on it. It's a normal surface, so we can do things like which points cloud will be any better. Then we can do things like coming to the surfaces rollout, and I can turn on altitude range, for example, and maybe increasing that. And you can see there's on the map there's a kind of tree line here, so I can bring the trees up to there. So this is optimizing it a bit already. We wouldn't want it on the peaks. We'd obviously need to use camera culling. We would want slope angle on there. So on and so forth, but it works, right? It works. You can easily import terrain data with TyFlow and scatter on it with ForestPack. But it's worth playing with, and I think if you are in the business of being able to having to pull in this kind of satellite data, this is or you want something just for the background of your renders. You need a real bit of mountain very quickly. This is a huge time saver. and it's beautiful because you can update it at any point. I'm not a TyFlow expert. You can try and ask me questions about it, but I've just seen the potential of it, I think, and how great it would be to combine it with ForestPack. I will certainly be using it for my scenes in future. If you've got any thoughts about it, or you've tried it, or you've found any limitations with using ForestPack with it or anything like that, then please let me know or let us know. Other than that, I think that was my last question. I've been talking for far too long anyway.
Not that bad. I mean,
so
90 minutes, usual, average.
Yeah.
Someone was asking on how to create a fully city environment in 3ds Max using free tools. I mean, that's going to be tricky, but I pasted our talk from AU.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
In 2023, that covers a lot of that.
A complete New York style city with streets built. Wow, that's full on.
Yeah.
The difficulty with that kind of thing is keeping, like, New York looks obviously very organic, very, very, the buildings are unique, and replicating that in a procedural way can be challenging. Especially with free tools.
We have a beautiful collection of parametric buildings.
Yeah, that would help. That would certainly help.
That said, that would help a lot. Yeah, we have some tutorial on that, right?
There's definitely stuff like that.
So while I do that,
So any other questions, anyone? Let me know. I think we'll try and do this one with at least in 30 days' time. The next one, I'll put it on the calendar now. But in the meantime, very grateful to the people who do send in questions. It's really great, especially people who send in questions specifically for the live stream. It makes it so much easier, and I think more relevant for everyone, because if you've had an issue, then chances are, or you've got a question, then chances are everyone else has had the same question. So it's really great to see those. Otherwise, our forum and our help desk are always good places to send stuff to. If we'll pick it up from there. But keep us posted with the things you're trying to do. There was a lot of RailClone questions this week, and I think that's just because RailClone generally has more questions. But if you've got any ForestPack questions for next time, that would be interesting too. Yeah, just keep us informed.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've got anything else to add, Jaime.
No, yes. I mean, we'll try to. I mean, I know we should be live every month, but it's quite tricky. Small team, busy guys. But we will try to be back live, as Paul said, in 30 days. And nothing else.
No, we're EUE in early June. So
yeah.
If anyone's there, I'll be there. Say hello to me. But I think that's about it. Cool.
And that's all.
Okay. Then
so thanks everyone for showing up.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Adios.